Strange People in This World, submitted by Hayden L. Strange things can happen to anyone at any time, so hopefully my encounter will encourage you to be more aware of your surroundings. This event happened to me when I was a sophomore in high school. I'm now a junior at university. It was a beautiful Sunday in late May, and everyone was excited for summer break. I knew that soon I would have to start my summer job, so I decided to go for a bike ride so I could have time to myself before I started working. I embarked on my 30-ish mile journey at around 3 p.m. The town I lived in at the time is home to the start of a long walking/biking trail that takes you directly to a large nearby city. I planned to ride the trail to the city, explore a bit, and then ride back before dark. I set off on my journey, and I was enjoying the late afternoon sun as well as the sounds of nature. The ride to the city went extremely smoothly, no problems whatsoever. The problem started when I first arrived at the outskirts of the city. I should add that this is a very safe area, minimal crime, and there are many large shopping centers nearby, such as Sam's Club and Walmart, meaning there are always people around. When on the trail, you cross a bridge that goes over a very busy road. Then immediately after crossing said bridge, you make a left at the path and it continues parallel to the road below. The path eventually connects to the shoulder of the road just for a short distance. So I was biking up the path parallel to the road and eventually reached the part where it connects to the shoulder. Where the path meets the road, there is an intersection with stoplights. I'm going to try and explain this part as best I can, so bear with me. I was going to turn right at this intersection, which would take me into the area with Walmart and Sam's Club. I glanced on the opposite side of the road, and in the left turn lane there was a car whose passenger was standing on the road yelling and banging on the window of the person who was in the straight lane. I remember thinking to myself, road rage much? But I made my turn and kept on my way, not thinking anything at all. Since I was turning right and the car with the road rage guy was turning left, that meant that they would pass by me when their light changed and allowed them to execute their turn. Sure enough, I felt that car come up behind me. There's no sidewalk on this portion of the road, so I temporarily had to hug close to the curb. Since I knew that they could be trouble, I kept my head forward and didn't react as they drove past. As they went by, though, I heard them yelling expletives at me as well as calling me things that could be considered offensive. I didn't really pay too much attention to them as they passed, however, but I did notice that the passenger's head was now outside the window. The vehicle was speeding quite heavily, but from what I could tell, the passenger had a dark hoodie or mask covering his entire face. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I would soon find out. Before going any further, I should explain how this area is set up. Basically, from where I was, Walmart and Sam's Club were in the back left corner. If I continued biking straight on the street I was on, I'd end up behind a long strip mall. This is where those guys drove, and it was where I was originally planning on going. When I saw that that's where they went, I noped out and pulled off in front of some closer shops. I pulled out my phone and called my mom to tell her what was happening because I was honestly confused as to what actually just happened. And I wish this is where it ended. We talked for a couple of minutes, and I kid you not, the second I hung up, I saw the car pull up right next to me, and I remember thinking, what could these guys possibly want? The passenger opened the door and swung his legs onto the ground. It took a minute to realize what I was seeing, but the guy was wearing an extremely detailed devil mask. I was so confused, we kind of just looked at each other for about 5 seconds. Then my senses kicked in, and I pushed forward on my pedals to get the heck out of there. Devil Mask Guy then sprinted from the passenger seat to block me from going anywhere. At this point, he raised his fists and started to rock them up and down like what a boxer does when they are sizing up their opponent. He was about 6 inches from my face, his fists about half the distance. In these kinds of situations, you always think you're going to be tough, but believe me, when your fight reaction gets denied, it's hard to do anything but freeze. I wasn't sure if he was going to try to rob me or what, so I kept my eyes on his fists to make sure that they weren't going to reach for anything. I remember saying, Man, what are you doing? Look, dude, don't hurt me. I know, it sounds pretty weak, but that's all I could manage to get out. After several seconds, he jumped back into his car and the driver floored it, going down the wrong way of a one-way parking lot. I honestly don't recall if the driver of the vehicle had a mask on or not, but either way, it was still creepy. I didn't even think to get the plate numbers on the car, but what I do know is that the vehicle was a red Honda Accord sedan, maybe from the model year 2007. Luckily, a couple of doors down in the strip mall was my then neighbor's business office, and thankfully he was there, being it a Sunday. I was able to stop in and explain what had just happened, so we both stepped out to look for the car, but to no avail. I called my mom from there, and she came to pick up my bike since she was in the area. I stayed in my neighbor's office for some time, and then I rode home with him. Our conversation on the way home mainly consisted of self-defense tactics, and he told me stories about some sketchy experiences he's had. He said one day he was coming out of his office, and there was a group of several people who surrounded him, blocking him from entering his vehicle. I don't recall how that story ended, but it changed my perception on what I thought was actually a safe area. Honestly, the experience was pretty spooky and all, but I would say I was more confused than anything else. First of all, it was the middle of the day on a Sunday, so there was a lot of people out and about. If these guys meant harm, why were they doing it when everyone else could see them? Also, they were menacing. I'm pretty sure they were doing it just to get a scare out of people, and I just happened to be a victim of one of their pranks. These pranksters will eventually mess with the wrong person, I'm sure, and that person will either beat them senseless or pull a firearm. I can tell you these guys did not seem harmless, as I felt very threatened, especially when the masked man ran to cut me off. So, Weird Devil Masked Man and his accomplice? Let's not meet again. And I mean that too, as I now carry the necessary tools to protect myself wherever I go. For all I know, you could be listening to this right now, since you probably enjoy spooky things. To wrap this story up, I urge everyone to carry mace, a blade, or even a gun if you can legally do so. And please, watch your surroundings. This situation seemed unavoidable, but you might be able to avoid other potentially dangerous interactions like this one. Summons, submitted by Ashley F. Let me just start by clarifying, I'm not crazy. This all started about May 2016. I was a big paranormal fan and curious about Wiccans, being that my mom was one. One day I was Googling simple spells that I could try on my own, and eventually lingered into black magic stuff. Well, I found a spell on how to summon a demon of your choice, and me being me was like, hey, let's try this. All that it said was required was a Ouija board, 5 red candles or 4 red and 1 black, a mirror, and then I had to draw the sigil of choice. That night, when my mom left for work, I got everything ready and even waited till 3 or 3:30 in the morning to make sure that things were more spooky, I guess. I read the directions, placed the candles around the Ouija board, and sat the mirror in front of me and the board. Then I said the spell, and remind you, it came off a cheesy website that hadn't been updated since 2005. Well, when everything was said and done, it said the candles would flicker and I would hear a low hum and things would get really cold. Lo and behold, all of that was happening, and me being dumb, I forgot to prepare any bargains, deals, or questions. I blurted out, "You can feed off my energy if you decide to stay." Now, I didn't sell my soul or anything like that, but a week or so passed and I was staying at a friend's house. I was cuddling with her cat downstairs while she and her boyfriend and her roommates were sleeping upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking in the kitchen. Then all of a sudden, my friend Cat started growling and hissing, and then took off running upstairs. I swear up and down, I saw someone just standing there, staring at me. I rolled over and went to sleep. Another week passed, and I live in Pennsylvania. In the area I live in, there's a haunted church and a cemetery that was built in 1860. It's notorious for its hauntings. It's called St. Joseph's, but everyone here calls it St. Joe's. If you ever visit, you'll get this overwhelming feeling of dread like you're not supposed to be there. You'll hear Indians yelling and horses galloping, women screaming, and some nights the bell will ring when no one is there. One night, 3 friends and I decided to visit, and when we pulled in, I instantly felt euphoric, like I was on the best drugs in the world. But when we got to the cemetery, we heard snarling coming from near me, and the galloping was heard. I was getting dizzy, I was feeling sick, and my one friend grabbed me to snap out of it. He was attacked, and later we found scratches all down his back, on his throat, and on his legs. The snarling got louder, and I was getting sicker. My other friend was clinging to me, begging us to leave, and I don't remember this, but apparently I stood there laughing maniacally, and apparently it wasn't my laugh either. My laugh sounds like Kitty Foreman from that 70s show. Yeah, I know, it's terrible. Anyway, my friends forced me into the car and back into a reality of sorts. I turned to my best friend at the time, and with a ghostly white face, touched her with my cold, clammy hands, and she instantly got a migraine. This whole thing scared the fucking hell out of me. A couple of days after St. Joe's, I sat down with my friends and told them what I did, and why certain things were happening. They weren't happy. Let's skip ahead. August of 2016, I was babysitting my twin niece and nephew that were 2 at the time. I went and got them a sippy, and when I got back, their eyes were wide, peeled behind mine, and my niece says, "Who dat?" Flash forward to November 2016, and my 2 friends and I were experimenting with things we shouldn't have been. We went to my bedroom, which is 3 rooms over from the living room. We were praying something creepy wouldn't happen, but it did. They sent me into my living room, and I kept hearing tapping on the mirror, and as plain as day I heard, "Do you really believe in God?" This chilled me right to the bone. I could go on about the creepy things that happened since he's been here, but that would take too long. Since I've learned having him here, he's strong enough to kill. He's killed my little brother's cat because my brother called him out. This thing moves things around and can manifest wherever he wants. His face makes you question everything you've ever known. It's been about 3 years now having this thing with me, and most of my friends kind of accepted his energy around. I think mostly out of fear. In my opinion, I feel he's mellowed out. Recently, I've moved into a new house with some friends, and he doesn't harm my cats, but he does mess with my roommate's dogs and lizard. I've had to hang a rosary in the doorframe of my roommate's son's bedroom, and I've paid a price for that. To this day, we don't know the actual name of this demon. We refer to him as Mr. Not Nice, just to avoid conflict. Weird Nissan, submitted by Terry N. Just right now, this very minute, maybe 10 minutes ago, I pulled into a parking space behind a Nissan to use free Wi-Fi from a local business. As I approached it from the rear, both of the brake lights went on. I thought, oh good, now I can move up to get an even better Wi-Fi signal. Then the brake lights went off. I made my final approach and straightening out my wheel, and one of the brake lights on the Nissan went on. I turned off my Ford Escape and then walked over towards the Nissan. There was no driver, no kids in the car playing, no seats in the far back position, so I ruled out a prank on unsuspecting people like me. But there was nothing there. I know this was before Halloween when I submitted this, and the clocks are still on their spring forward mode, so in other words, it's almost 5 p.m. and still light out. I decided to get back in my car and write this out so you're the first to get it. No, and for human interest, this was outside of Toronto. I know I wasn't imagining any of this. I won't get out to look at something unless I'm convinced. How the heck were those lights going on? Violent Chase by Hella Saucy. The other night, I was driving in the center lane of a 3-lane city street. All of a sudden, a car came into my right blind spot and almost slammed into me. I looked over, and it was swerving in and out of the lane, braking abruptly. I honk, and I look over to see if the driver is possibly distracted, and I see that the man driving is drinking something out of a brown bottle. The man comes up to my side and is screaming at the top of his lungs. Not wanting to get involved, I make a lane change to the leftmost lane to get away from him. I can still hear him screaming, so I turn on my rearview camera and I see the man swerve across 2 lanes from rightmost lane to get behind me. He then starts speeding up as if he's trying to ram me from behind. Once I see him inches from my bumper, I decide to run the red light I'm stopped at and make a right turn in front of the 2 lanes of traffic beside me, in the hopes that at this point, he'll just leave me alone. I look at my rearview camera once again and I see that this man is following me, trying to hit me from behind yet again. I panic and I speed off onto a side street, but I look back and he would not let up. He was swerving in the lanes behind me and was trying to keep up, and in the distance I see a freeway on-ramp, so I speed over in hope of losing him on the freeway. The on-ramp has 2 lane changes that merge into one. I pass up a car prior to the merge, thinking that the car will create a buffer between me and this man chasing me. When I look back into my camera, I see that the man is driving in the shoulder, on the brush to the side of the on-ramp in order to pass the other car and catch up to me. At this point, I'm driving close to 100 miles an hour, scared for my life, so I slow down and dial 911. I explain the situation to the dispatcher, and she recommends that I try to get away to safety. The man then catches up to me and begins coming up to the side of me on the freeway, and he repeatedly tries to swerve into me as if to ram me or run me off the road. I slowed down in hopes that he would pass me up, but he too slowed down, and his wife in the passenger seat throws a bottle at my car. For a second, I lose visibility as the car is covered in a brown foamy liquid. I think to myself, surely this is the extent of this road rage. And I look over, and it seemed as if he was continuing on the freeway. Ready to get away, I pulled off on the next freeway exit, thinking I could just leave the situation. As I do this, the man sees me and makes a 4-lane change onto the exit ramp, tries to ram me once again at the freeway exit. I'm forced to speed through city streets, and I finally end up at a red light, trapped next to this man. I look over at him and I roll down my window. He is screaming at me, "Why the fuck did you honk at me, you bitch? You trying to make me look like a bad father in front of my kids? You wanna go, bitch? You beep beep little bitch." His wife is also yelling at me, saying, "Why would you honk at him in front of my kids?" I look into their back seat and I see 2 children in car seats. Since I was still on speaker with the dispatcher, she heard all of that and told me to just try and get away. At this point, I was done. I just wanted to get away from him, so I made a U-turn to head back onto the freeway. He followed me once again and almost hit a plastic construction lane barrier to do so. He's following me again and is trying to hit me from behind. Once I got onto the overpass to get onto the freeway, I glanced at him to the side of me, and I see that he is holding something up in my direction. Suddenly, I hear a very loud bang! In that moment, the dispatcher on the phone screams, "Did he shoot you? Are you okay?" Thinking I was shot, I started screaming, "He's shooting at me! He's shooting at me! He's going to kill me!" Realizing that running away isn't working, I stop and the man sped off. Luckily, there was no broken glass and I wasn't injured in any way. The dispatcher told me to pull off to a nearby safe location, so I went to a parking lot of a nearby mall, and I told the dispatcher the make, color, and model of the car, as well as a partial license plate. The whole time I was driving there, I was concerned that the man could be following me again, but they sent an officer immediately over to file a police report. In waiting for the officer, I realize that my car's cameras are always recording, so I hit the save button. The officer comes over. I tell him my story describing everything in detail. I also tell him that I also have footage of the whole thing. We take a walk around my car, and for the most part there's no damage. The officer then informs me that because I'm not injured, and because there is no damage to the car, there really isn't anything that can be done. I ask him if it was an assault, and he says because the bottle hit my car and not me, it's not an assault. I ask him if it's reckless driving, and he says that here in California, it's a misdemeanor and that requires the presence of a CHIP officer to convict. I then ask him if it could be considered an attempted murder because he was trying to ram into me, but he says this is just plain old road rage and there's not much that can be done. At most, the officer said that once he had a complete license plate, an officer could go out and talk to this guy. I asked him if the potential footage could be helpful in getting this man reprimanded in some way, and he told me to only send the highlights and necessary screenshots, though he doesn't think anything can be done. At the end of all of it, I was extremely shaken up. I eventually went home and reviewed the footage captured by my car, and luckily I had the entire thing recorded. The moment he almost hit me, his wife throwing the bottle at me, his face as he was yelling at me, his license plate, and even him trying to ram me. It's all recorded. A few days later, the officer called me and confirmed the license plate I had in the video with a recording he had from the freeway on and off ramps. A week and a half passed, and there's no update. While I understand the law is the law, it is unacceptable to me that this man could be so overtly aggressive on the road, threatening my life, the lives of his children, and the lives of everyone else on the road with no sort of punishment. I was genuinely scared for my life, and in the process both he and I endangered the others on the road. Ultimately, this has left me feeling very disappointed with the system. An act of violence was committed, and due to technicalities, the other driver gets off. I'm trying to keep my retelling as factual as possible, but this was a really terrifying experience. Even in the past few days, I still feel a bit hesitant about being an aggressive driver, overtaking people, changing lanes, etc. I'm never comfortable honking. I really wish I could say this didn't get to me, but it has. One odd detail is that the man was taking pictures of my car before the bang happened. I mean, what could he possibly want that for? Has anyone else been in a situation like this? Is there truly nothing that can be done? Any recommendations for how I can at least have someone check on those kids? Like I said, I have full footage of everything. Just Looking Around by Cat-Like Typing Detected. When I was young, between the ages of 9 and 15 roundabouts, my parents would take my family, Mom, Dad, me, and my younger brother, camping and cottaging every year at the end of the season, so as to get better locations at lower rates. Invariably, we'd go with a couple or couples that were friends of the family, and it would be a nice group event weekend or longer. One particular couple, Dave and Karen, went along every year. My father and Dave were, and are, still fast friends. The year of this story, we were in a cottage on a small lake, about 2 miles in diameter. It was during a near-perfect autumn in, I think, the southern tier Finger Lakes region of western New York. It was only my family and Dave and Karen this year. One thing of importance to relate is that Dave and my father fancy themselves amateur architectural buffs and love looking at vintage, old, and historical buildings or houses. Bear with me here. Often camping and cottaging as late in the season as we did, the regulars would already be gone for the season. Summer homes, fishing cottages, and the like would be prepped for the winter and locked up for the season, awaiting the return of the owners the following spring. To my father and his friend Dave, looking meant breaking in to fully check the place out. They never did any damage or tamper or take anything. They just found the most interesting deserted homes, picked the lock or the latch, let themselves in, and looked at all of the original woodwork or styling or whatever. Then they lock everything back up as it was, and then left. I don't recall how old I was, but this particular year it was apparently decided that my brother and I were old enough to tag along for the house they'd singled out. It was halfway around the lake. I remember everything very vividly, from the outside appearance to the door we entered to the whole of the interior. The rear door was locked with a padlock through a bar latch. However, the securing screws for the bar latch were exposed, rather than covered by the bar. 3 Phillips head screws out, and we were in. We wandered about the ground floor, and I recall the place being a bit musty and darkish, but very nice, if so cluttered. There were some comic books lying around which delighted me, so the owner must have had children. It took a few minutes, but my father noticed something seemed not quite right. It took a bit, but then he realized from an almost inaudible background hum that the fridge was still running. Looking inside, it revealed about a half case of unopened Labatt's beer bottles, an indication that the place may not be closed for the season, obviously. Oh well, the adults think. We're already here. Haven't seen any cars or activity the past couple of days, and only have the upstairs to look at. May as well finish this up. So we head upstairs, and the layout was simple. Stairway goes up one side of the house and tops off at one end of a hallway that traverses the length of the building. It's the only way up or down. Off this hallway, and all to the left, are 4 evenly spaced doors. We enter the first room, and it was empty save for a massive brass bed frame. No box spring or mattress, just the frame. And by massive, I mean just that. My father and Dave marveled over the solidity and craftsmanship of the thing. Wide, high head, and footboards with corner posts that only barely fell short of making it a full-blown 4-poster bed. All of it was welded, no screws, nuts, or bolts. This thing was either assembled in the room, or the room was built around it. There was absolutely no way it was brought, completely that way, into that room. I doubt it would fit through the patio doors if the entire door assembly was taken off in advance to clear for more space. So my dad and Dave are oohing and eyeing over the brasswork a bit more, and we move on to the next room, which is totally empty. We move to the third room, which was totally empty. It's becoming clear the family only really uses the ground floor while they stay there. We're getting ready to move to the last room when there's this sudden, loud crash. First thought in all of our minds, the owners are back and we are way busted. My father moves to the head of the stairs, looks down, goes down. Nothing. Nobody there. Nothing obviously out of place from what was remembered when we walked in. There was just nothing. Shrugs all around, we head off to room 4 with the general feeling of, let's look at this final room and then get out before we really do get caught. We enter the final room to find it completely empty, save for a huge, welded, brass bed frame. My father looked at Dave. He looked back, and Dave ran out of the room and down the hall. A moment later we heard him cry out, so we all ran down the hall to the first room, which was now empty. I don't actually remember us getting out of the house, but I know it was fast, and I know they didn't bother to screw that latch back on. To this day, my father and Dave will both acknowledge the event, but won't talk about it, and my brother doesn't recall it at all. As far best as I know, that was the last house inspection they ever attempted. It Gave Me a Rush, submitted by Chad T. This is a true story that happened to me about 20 years ago. It made me a strong person, and it would be an honor for you to read it on your show, Uncle Josh. I was 19 or 20 years old when this happened, and I had just gotten off of work at a Sears Auto Center. I was tired, covered in grease, and all that good stuff that comes from working on cars all day. As I left the parking lot, I noticed a big older model Ford Bronco tailgating me. As I pulled up to a stoplight, I changed lanes to get this guy off my ass. I felt the eyes of these guys gazing at me, and I'm not going to lie, I was scared. I didn't want to look at them. Then they started screaming at me, and I still wouldn't look. Finally, I was forced to look over, and once they threw a beer bottle at my car, I looked at the passenger and he yelled at me,
"You cut us off and now we're gonna kill you, you faggot!"
I immediately said, no dude, I didn't cut you off. Stop throwing shit at my car." The light turned green and I thought they were going to follow me for sure. And I was right. Now, this was in 1998, way before cell phones, so I couldn't call for help. These guys were as close to me as possible without hitting my bumper, and it was about 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, so there was hardly any traffic on the road. I was terrified. I did, however, have my softball gear in the car, so I pulled my aluminum bat close to me in case I needed it. These guys seriously wanted to hurt me, and I didn't want them to follow me close to my house, and I desperately tried to lose them. Their truck was huge, and I couldn't outrun them in my '89 Sundance. I thought maybe I would drive to the police station, hoping these guys would figure out what I was doing and then get lost quickly. However, I did have an ounce of weed on me, so I couldn't risk getting arrested again for weed. I decided the only thing I could do was call their bluff. If they wanted it, they were going to get it. I could hear them screaming and still throwing shit at my car for what seemed to be forever, but it was probably only like 7 minutes. They kept calling me a fag, and I guess that was their go-to insult. I'm not a huge guy, but I'm not a bitch either, so I clutched onto my bat tight to my body as I drove, thinking about the best place to stop and get this over with. I pulled into a small cemetery that backs up to some woods, and the small road does a loop around the cemetery, one way in and one way out. They kept screaming,
"We're gonna get you, faggot!"
and laughing uncontrollably. However, the laughing stopped when I slowed down and came to a stop. Once I put my car in park, I heard the guy in the passenger seat say,
"What the fuck?"
I knew it then and there that they were scared little bitches. They opened my car and jumped out aggressively. The driver then said, "Oh, fuck this." Since I was blocking the small single-lane road, the only way out for them was to navigate in reverse in their big-ass truck. They had to reverse slowly as to not hit anything, so I walked them down as they reversed out. I said, "Where are you guys going? I thought you were going to kill me." The passenger, all of a sudden, said with a shaky voice,
"Oh, we thought you were someone else. Sorry."
I took my bat and smashed the headlights out of their truck. They were now both screaming in terror, and I'm not sad to say that it gave me a rush. They finally made it out of the cemetery, and it was over. Next day, I had to go to work again. It was about 11 a.m., and I got the work order for a headlight repair on a Ford Bronco. Yep, small world. An Odd Feeling by Emilio GTZ. 2005 was a bad year for me. Not sure if the worst so far. I haven't really ranked them all yet, but it was certainly a contender. That was the year my inner child died, the year I became a full-time adult. It was all the result of a downward spiral that started with my marriage in 2003, followed by the loss of my job and becoming a father in 2004. Work was scarce, and I started working about 30 hours a week as a freelancer, getting paid every 2 or 3 months. This was killing me. By the summer of 2005, I was homeless, jobless, and had lost one of my best friends in a car accident. Time had just stopped for me. It halted. During that time, days really didn't matter to me. My wife was unemployed too, and the weekends and weekdays lost all significance to us. I only took notice because my friends were still living in week intervals. Not too often, I would go and share a beer with them, and my friend was still single, so his house was the place we assembled at on those occasions. It was a hot Friday, and we were all drinking a lot, joking, laughing, saying all sorts of stupid things. And that was the 4 of us that night. The beer was about to run out shortly after midnight, and 2 of my friends volunteered to go out and get some more. Me and my friends stayed back at the house, drinking, singing songs. And all of a sudden, his expression became very serious, very stern. He looked sober. The stupid MP3 player ran out of battery 5 seconds later. "How's your love life? How's your marriage?" he asked me. I swear, he sounded like he had not drank a single beer that day. It was no secret my marriage was a train wreck. Even my not-so-close friends knew about that. But it was not the usual way we approached such matters. We used to go around in circles before talking serious, personal matters. I kind of felt a bit sober, too. Suddenly, and I'm not sure it was because of the question or the way my friend looked during that moment. Of course, now we were surrounded by silence. "It's okay, I guess," I told him. He asked me, "Are you sure? How is your relationship with your wife?" I responded, "It's getting better." I wasn't lying. 2 days before, we had just received our eviction notice. For me and my wife, that was our first shit-got-real moment. I mean, getting pregnant had not been that hard. We didn't even fight over it. We talked. We made a plan. For the first time in more than a year, we had agreed on something. "You gonna make it?" my friend asked. "What?" I said. I was confused at this point. "Are you gonna make it? Can you make it on your own?" This question had a certain meaning because we, he and me, had similar backgrounds. We grew up as part of a tight, close family group, but our parents were not okay with the way we wanted to live our lives, so we received no support from them, and asking for their help was generally not an option. We did things on our own. "Yeah, I can make it," I told him. With that I meant to say I was not getting divorced right away. "You're going to be okay," he told me. He sounded sad, and I was still unsure about what was actually happening. Then he told me he was going to our hometown the next weekend, a city about 200 miles to the west. He asked me to go with him, and I told him I couldn't because I had to deal with leaving the house I was living in then. He said he was going to visit his relatives and a girl that he was romantically interested in. At that point, the 2 other friends arrived with more beer, and they put the music back on, and the party went on. This was the last time I saw my friend. A week later, he called me on the phone. It was a Saturday night, and he told me everything had gone wrong with his trip. He'd gotten mad with his relatives, his date went bad, and he wanted to get back. He'd been drinking, and I told him to stay put and get back on Sunday. He said he agreed with me. We made a few jokes regarding his date and then ended the call. And so began the strangest night of my life. I was downstairs in the living room watching a movie, having a drink. The kid was asleep in his room, and my wife was watching TV in the master bedroom. It was around 10 p.m., and I went to the kitchen, got some ice, and then filled my glass. I felt a chill when I put the bottle back on the table. I stood there a few seconds, then shook my head and went back to the couch. I took a sip off my drink and tried to clear my mind, but then I realized I was fully alert. I stood up, turned around, and said aloud, "Something's wrong here." The sound of my own voice scared me. I put the glass on the small table and went upstairs with a certain urgency. The kid was still asleep. Everything was okay in his room. Then I went to the bedroom. My wife was also sound asleep. Very unusual for her. She used to watch TV until 2 or 3 in the morning. I called her name and she didn't even flinch, so I turned off the TV and the bedside lamp. I went back downstairs, picked up my drink, and resumed watching the movie. I felt very uneasy. Half a bottle of whiskey had done nothing to me. At midnight, I decided to call it quits and turned the TV off. I went to the kitchen to leave my glass in the sink, and as I went back into the dining room, it was that chill again. It made me stop there, started looking around. I couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong, very wrong. I turned every light on in the house and went looking all over the place for something. Couldn't tell what, just trying to find out what was so wrong. I thought that with the noise I was making while going from one end of the house to the other, opening and closing doors, my wife or kid would eventually wake up. But they didn't. They remained fully asleep. After double-checking every window and outgoing door, I turned out the lights and went upstairs to the bathroom. There I found a copy of Dan Brown's Da Vinci's Code. I know. I had received it a couple of months back as a gift from a friend. Well, that night, I started reading it. I went to bed, turned on my lamp, and continued reading. I realized I couldn't sleep. Didn't even feel tired in the least. An hour went by, and I was becoming anxious again, to the point of repeating the doors and windows routine I had performed before. When I came back to the bed again, I tried to wake my wife up, but she wouldn't wake up. Again, this was unusual of her. I turned the TV on, but continued with my reading. It was now about 2:30. Then I started to feel really bad, really scared. I was sure something was about to happen. Actually, I wanted something to happen. An earthquake, an explosion, whatever. I wanted that overwhelming fight-or-flight feeling to go away. I went downstairs, turned all the lights on again, and as I stood in the middle of the living room, I had that thought again. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong here, and I couldn't identify what it was, and I needed to identify it, or that something really bad was going to happen. I went outside, walked to the parking lot, and stood there. It was a warm summer night, clear sky, everything looked normal. I went back to the house, and the VCR clock said 3:15. I sat on the dining room table and stared at the wood grain for a long time. Slowly, I felt the dreadful sensation going away. I slowly felt going back to my senses. "You missed it," I said out loud. I wasn't sure what to think. I didn't feel that urgency anymore, but I felt guilty and kind of sad. I went upstairs, checked on my kid, my wife, made sure they were both breathing. I went downstairs again, turned the TV on, and I sat there until dawn. That Sunday, my wife had a party at her mom's, and she wanted me to go with her. I kind of wanted to go too, but I was just feeling very tired. She asked me what was wrong, and I asked her why she fell asleep so early, and if she had heard me last night. She said she didn't know. I just felt like I was carrying something heavy, she said. I couldn't remember anything else. I couldn't sleep, I told her. I was feeling anxious and scared all the time. The expression in her face said that she thought I had drank too much. She left the house around 11 a.m., and I was in charge of cleaning up the place. I knew the routine. Make sure everything was fine by the time she came back. I felt tired and down, but even though I had a ton of reasons to be depressed, I couldn't tell which one was keeping me down that morning. The call came about noon. It was one of my other best friends. He sounded scared. "We need to talk," he said. "I just received a call and I need you to help me. Where are you?" I told him I'm at home. He said, "I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. I was finishing tying my shoes when the doorbell rang, and I rushed to open it. My friend looked just like I felt. Without talking, we went down to the parking lot, got into his car, and we took the way to downtown. "I got a call," he said, "from one of my wife's coworkers." He struggled with every single word. I missed it, I thought. I missed it. Something did happen after all. He said last night there was an accident. It was reported on the AM news, and the car looked just like our friend's car. He thought it was him. I'm going to the morgue to make sure. So that was it, I said. What? He asked me. I said to him, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept feeling like something was happening, something bad, but I couldn't find out what. He asked, what do you mean? And I said, it's him. He's dead. He died early this morning. We identified the body. It was our friend. He had been driving too fast, they told us. Lost control while taking a curve 6 miles from the city. He didn't die instantly, though. Probably took him about a half an hour. A truck driver reported the accident at 2:45 a.m. When the help arrived, he was gone, but they missed him, just barely. Sometimes I like to think that my friend's death was just an accident. But that last conversation we had, was he saying goodbye to me? Did he sense his death? Did he plan it? What exactly kept me awake that night? Culinary School, submitted by Eric B. This was a fucked up experience I had about 20 years ago. I'd lost my job due to downsizing and realized that what I was doing in my life was not really what I wanted to do. My wife was and still is a successful corporate broker, and that afforded me the chance to go back to school to establish a new career. Ever since I was a kid, I was a cooking fiend and loved to prepare meals for my family. As a latchkey kid, I did a lot of meal prep for my parents when they finally got home from their very demanding jobs. With that in mind, I enrolled in a culinary program at a local community college. I was super stoked to be doing something that I really loved and that I knew would provide a way to support my family. By this time, we had a 2-year-old daughter, and I should say I was 27 at the time. I am by no means a come-hither beauty as far as guys go. Tom Cruise I'll never be. But I'm also very fit and pride myself on my appearance. I think that played a role in what I'm about to tell you. I was one of 2 older students in the program, as most people who were there were right out of high school. We were often paired with fellow students on projects, and this is where my troubles began. That problem? I'll call her Sandra. She was a very beautiful young girl, very ambitious, and took a liking to me right away. It was after our first project together, coming up with a variation on a simple recipe of eggplant parmigiana, that we got to know one another. It wasn't really a contest that we were involved in, but our instructors did reward us with paper accommodations when we came up with unique ideas. We got one, and both of us were very proud. She wanted to celebrate after class, and I obliged this request with a number of other people from the class. We went to a local bar, and after I called my wife to let her know, so anyone who thinks I was cheating, that was not the case. I realized that night, though, that Sandra had very obvious feelings for me. I did my best to play it off and make an early exit, but she followed me out to my car and kept saying how happy she was to be my partner and hoped that we could build on our culinary relationship. I'm sure some of you are actually laughing right now and saying, culinary relationship? But, yep, that's exactly what she said. I told her I hoped that we would both be successful, then got in my car and went home. Immediately I told my wife about it, and she laughed and just said, and this is another quote, that Sandra was just a young kitten who was smitten. I laughed and let it go. Over the next 2 weeks, despite my not being paired with Sandra for assignments, I found her constantly behind me or next to me. When I told my wife about it, she reiterated what she had already said, and I kept telling her that I didn't understand this. She was a very attractive girl and had no reason to be flirting or messing around with a guy who was nearly 10 years older than her. One night, I went out with our group to the same place that we had been before and had some drinks, and I asked that my wife come with me. She did and met Sandra and said to me afterwards that I had nothing to worry about. She was just looking up to me as some kind of mentor. I thought that was weird, as we were both in the same class, and I had no business being a mentor to anybody. This is when Sandra started calling and leaving messages on my answering machine at home. They were long and rambling, always about school, but had a strange twinge to them. Then she started calling my cell phone, which I had just gotten. I hadn't given out the number to anyone, but somehow she had it. She also started showing up at random places I was at, like the mall buying my wife a Christmas gift, the supermarket. One time she was standing outside an oil change place. She was always saying how interesting it was that we were at the same places. I told my wife, and now she started to think it was odd too, but what was I going to do other than tell Sandra to buzz off? Fast forward to after Christmas. My family and my wife's family had chipped in to buy me a set of Zwilling knives. I didn't know at the time, but I did shortly thereafter, that they were worth about $2,500. Well, in our second semester, I was bringing my new knife set to class to use. I had excelled in my knife skills greatly since I was making a lot of food at home, and I loved the way those suckers felt in my hand and still do. One day, and I believe it was a Thursday night, one of my knives went missing. I immediately asked my classmates if they had seen it. It was a chef's knife, so something that was pretty easily identifiable. Everyone helped me to look for it, but no one could find it, and I was royally pissed, and embarrassed to have to go home and tell my wife, who had spent so much money on it, that I had just lost it. I was seriously bummed, but kept going to class and doing what I had to do to get my degree, and get placed in a paid internship program that would lead to a job. A couple of weeks later, I got bumped into by Sandra, and she said she had found a knife online and bought it and wanted to give it to me because she felt so bad that my other knife had been stolen. I said that was very nice of her and completely unnecessary and that I would pay for it. She insisted no, it was a gift and she had gotten it for a steal and that she had it in her apartment. If I wanted it, I could come over that night and get it. I agreed because I wanted my knife back, but I also told my wife, who agreed to accompany me to Sandra's apartment. We got there after dumping our kid off at our in-laws, and I went up the walk to see about the knife. My wife waited in the car down at the street, and after I knocked on the door, I heard Sandra say, "Come on in." I was apprehensive, but went in and didn't see her right away. I called out to her again, and she said, "I'm in here, I've got it," and I went through her kitchen. Her apartment was set up that the door entered through a short hallway, but then emptied into her kitchen and the rest of the apartment. When I got to her living room, there she was, literally splayed out, wearing lingerie, thigh-highs, and had a rose in her teeth. I stopped and said, I'm sorry, I think you're expecting somebody else." Sandra just looked at me. After taking the rose out of her mouth, said, "No, I've been waiting for you." That's when I noticed she was holding the knife, and quite frankly, it was my knife, not one that she had bought on the internet. I had made a special mark on all of the handles so I would recognize that they were mine. I started to back up and told her that she was going to have to just bring the knife to class. I was very appreciative that she had it, but I would forget about this whole episode and that would be the end of it. The anger that flashed in her eyes is something I will never forget, and I was so thrilled when the door to the apartment opened and my wife was suddenly standing behind me. Sandra looked at us both and started freaking out. She actually started to cut her arms and say that I had led her on and that she was going to call the police and have me arrested for sexually assaulting her and my wife for beating her up. My wife and I simply turned and basically ran back to our car. I forgot all about the fucking knife and quite frankly didn't give a shit about it at that point. My wife, however, said that we were calling the police and reporting her for stealing my quite expensive piece of cutlery. So we did just that, and while we were sitting outside, Sandra came down, still dressed in her lingerie and heels, and started banging on our car door and window. Her forearms were all bloody, and she had the knife in her hand and was pointing it at my wife, who was in the passenger seat. I just hit the gas and took off. The cops met up with us about 10 minutes later. When they arrived at the apartment building, I had driven around the block and pulled up in front of the apartment building and immediately got out to talk to one of the cops. I told him everything that had happened, and he went into the building, and another car pulled up, and some more cops went inside. To make a long story short, what they found was my knife, which they later confirmed it was mine due to the mark that I'd put on it, and also a notebook of poems and pictures of me from our culinary class. The notebook also contained a bunch of original recipes that I had made and were scribbled down in my own notebook. Apparently, at some point, Sandra had also stolen my notebook and written down all of my recipes. She was charged with theft and eventually was expelled from the college when our professors found out about her actions, but was never criminally charged with anything because she didn't actually do anything to us other than bang on our car door. I finished that class. I have a decent executive chef job now, and I've never seen or heard from Sandra again. I hope I never do. The fact that I had to watch her arm her own arms with my knife scared the living shit out of me and my wife. I still have that chef knife, but I never use it. I actually don't even store it with my other knives. It has its own home in my shop in a frame. It's a reminder to me about a low point in my life and how much crazier it could have been had I been at that apartment by myself with Sandra. My advice to everyone out there is don't trust anybody, no matter how pretty or talented they are. Be careful and be true to the ones that you love. I know a lot of guys that probably would have gone after Sandra given the position that she had put herself in that night, but my love for my wife did not betray me. To Sandra, wherever you may be, never contact me again, and leave me and my family alone. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone, as always, for submitting your stories. And if you have a true scary story you'd like to hear narrated on this channel, email Uncle Josh, truescarystories @gmail.com. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And of course, follow me on social media. I promise to do better on that, and I probably will have a rant about how bad I am at Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. If you'd like to support this channel, please visit my website, truescarystories.net, and click on the button that says support, and consider becoming a patron. For as little as $1 a month, you can keep this channel running ad-free, and there's some other cool perks involved with that as well. I'm planning on adding video content that no one else will have available to them unless you're a patron. Becoming a patron is never necessary, but hey, if you feel so inclined, have at it. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank my latest patrons. Thanks to Susie M., Sarah C., and Jude. Your support means a lot. And until next time, everyone be excellent to each other. Be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. Oh, God, please use commas. What the fuck? I have no idea what that means. Oh, sweet Jesus. Oh, man. Ay. We all went to the... What? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'm totally confused. Either you did it or you didn't do it. So Scott came up and said... What? Wait, who? Who the fuck is Scott? Not once was Scott ever mentioned. There's no Scott in this story. Oh, man. I said Nissan. I think in Canada they say Nissan, right?